You're at 28,000 feet on Mount Everest. You've been climbing for 2 months. You're exhausted, hypoxic. Your brain is dying from lack of oxygen. And then you see him, a man sitting against a rock. He's not wearing gloves. His hands are black with frostbite. His oxygen mask is gone, and he's looking directly at you. His lips are moving. He's trying to speak. You stop, lean closer, and you hear him whisper, "Please, don't leave me." The summit is right there, just 300 meters away. You've spent $100,000 to be here, trained for a year, sacrificed everything. And this man, this dying stranger, is asking you to give it all up, to use your oxygen, to risk your life, to abandon your dream. What do? This isn't a hypothetical. This is the choice climbers face on Everest. Because people don't just die on that mountain. They die slowly, visibly. And dozens of climbers walk past them on their way to the summit. In 2006, a British climber named David Sharp sat dying in a cave. Over 40 people passed him. Most thought he was already dead. Some realized he was alive. A few stopped briefly, checked his pulse, offered oxygen, and then kept climbing. David Sharp died alone in that cave, and when the story broke, the world was horrified. How could people walk past a dying man? How could they prioritize a summit over a human life? But the climbers who were there, who faced that impossible choice, tell a different story. This is the truth about why climbers walk past the dying on Mount Everest, the psychology, the physiology, the ethics, the impossible choices, and the uncomfortable reality that most of us, in that situation, would make the same decision. This is that story. David Sharp was 34 years old, British, and obsessed with Mount Everest. He'd attempted to summit twice before, in 2003 and 2004, and failed both times. In 2006, he returned for a third attempt. This time, he was climbing solo. No guide, no team, no Sherpa support, just David, his determination, and a budget so tight he couldn't afford supplemental oxygen for the entire climb. This was a catastrophically bad decision. Climbing Everest without a guide is dangerous. Climbing without adequate oxygen is other 8,000-meter peaks. But David was experienced. He believed he could do it, and he was so close to achieving his dream that he was willing to risk everything. On May 14, 2006, David left Camp 4 on the northeast ridge, heading for the summit. He was climbing at night. Standard procedure. The goal is to summit at sunrise and descend before the afternoon heat makes avalanches and rockfalls more likely. David climbed slowly, too slowly. By the time he reached 27,190 feet, the area known as Green Boots Cave, he was hours behind schedule. But he kept going, pushed higher, reached the first step, the second step, and finally, around 1 p.m., David Sharp summited Mount Everest. He'd done it, achieved his dream, stood at the highest point on Earth, but summiting at 1 p.m. meant he had no margin for error on the descent. The sun was already high. Afternoon temperatures, while still far below freezing, were warmer, making snow unstable, and David was exhausted. He'd climbed for over 12 hours. His oxygen was nearly depleted, and his body was shutting down. Somewhere on the descent, David stopped. He crawled into Green Boots Cave, the small limestone alcove where Tsewang Paljor's frozen body had been lying since 1996. David sat down next to Green Boots, took off his gloves, a sign of severe hypothermia. The body feels hot, causing victims to remove clothing, and waited. He was still alive, still conscious, but unable to move, unable to descend, trapped at 27,890 feet in the death zone, where every minute brings you closer to death. The first climbers to pass David Sharp came through around 4 a.m. on May 15th, roughly 15 hours after David had sat down. It was a team ascending toward the summit. They saw a figure in the cave. Most assumed it was Green Boots, the famous frozen body, but one climber noticed something odd. This body wasn't curled in the fetal position like green boots. It was sitting upright, and it wasn't wearing gloves. The climber stopped, shined his headlamp into the cave, and realized this isn't green boots, this is someone else, and he's still alive. The climber checked David's pulse, faint, barely there. David's eyes were open but unfocused. His lips were moving, making sounds, but no coherent words. The climber tried to communicate. "Can you move? Can you walk?" No response, just labored breathing and a vacant stare. The climber faced a choice: attempt to help David, which would require using his own oxygen, abandoning his summit attempt and potentially dying himself, or continue climbing and hope someone else would help. He chose to continue climbing. He told other climbers on the route, "There's someone alive in Green Boots Cave. He's in bad shape." Over the next several hours, more than 40 climbers passed David Sharp. Here's what some of them did. Turkish climber Bursak Poçan and his team stopped, spent 20 minutes trying to revive David, gave him oxygen, tried to stand him up. But David was dead weight. His legs wouldn't work. His body was frozen in a sitting position. Poçan later said, "We tried everything, but he couldn't move, and we were running out of oxygen. If we stayed longer, we'd die too." British climber Mark Inglis, a double amputee climbing on prosthetic legs, passed David Inglis's team, radioed base camp, reporting David's location and condition. They were told, "He's beyond saving. Continue your climb." New Zealand guide Mark Woodward stopped, assessed David's condition, realized David was hypothermic, frostbitten, and likely suffering from cerebral edema, brain swelling caused by altitude. Woodward later said he was barely conscious. He wasn't responding to commands. Even if we got him on his feet, he couldn't walk. Moving him would have required 6 to 8 people, all using their oxygen, all risking their lives, and the chances of success were near zero. A team of Sherpas descended from above, passed David, and continued down. They had clients to protect. They couldn't stop. Over 40 climbers. Some stopped for a few minutes. Some radioed for help. Some offered oxygen. But all of them, eventually, kept moving, either up toward the summit or down towards safety. And David Sharp remained in the cave, alone, dying. By the evening of May 15th, David was dead. His body, still sitting upright, still next to Green Boots, became the newest landmark in the cave. For years afterward, climbers passing through would see 2 bodies: Green Boots, the man from 1996, and David Sharp, the man from 2006. When the news broke, the media erupted in outrage. Climbers let man die for summit glory. The Guardian, Everest, the mountain where compassion dies. BBC, 40 people walked past a dying man. CNN, the climbers involved were vilified. The double amputee, called heartless, faced especially selfish, brutal criticism. Monsters. People accused him of being more concerned with his own fame. He was attempting to become the first double amputee to summit Everest than with saving a life. But the climbers defended their actions, and their defense was uncomfortable, honest, brutal. Mark Inglis said, "We radioed for help. We were told he couldn't be saved. What were we supposed to do? Die with him?" Bursak Poçan said, "I tried. We all tried, but at that altitude, you can't perform miracles. You can barely keep yourself alive." Russell Bryce, an experienced Everest guide, said, "David Sharp made decisions that put him in that position. He climbed without adequate oxygen, without a team, without support. He chose risk, and he paid the price. That's not the fault of the people who walked past him." And Sir Edmund Hillary, the first person to summit Everest, said something that shocked the world. "I think the whole attitude toward climbing Mount Everest has become rather horrifying. People just want to get to the top. They don't give a damn for anybody else who may be in distress." David Sharp died because 40 people chose the summit over his life. But was that choice wrong? Or was it the only rational decision in an irrational place? The year after David Sharp died, another climber found himself in nearly the same situation. His name was Lincoln Hall. He was Australian, experienced, climbing with a professional team, and on May 25, 2006, just 11 days after David Sharp died, Lincoln Hall collapsed near the summit of Everest and was left for dead. But unlike David Sharp, Lincoln Hall survived. Because one climber made a different choice. Lincoln summited Everest around 3:30 a.m. on May 25th, but on the descent at approximately 28,200 feet, he began showing signs of cerebral edema, brain swelling caused by altitude. He became confused, disoriented, started hallucinating. His Sherpas tried to help him descend, but Lincoln kept sitting down, refusing to move, talking to people who weren't there. By 8 a.m., Lincoln was unconscious. His Sherpas checked for a pulse. Found his breathing had stopped. His skin by all measures, was cold. Lincoln Hall was dead. The Sherpas radioed base camp, reported that Lincoln had died. They removed his oxygen mask and jacket to bring back to his family as mementos, and they descended, leaving Lincoln's body at 28,200 feet. Lincoln's family was notified. His wife was told her husband had died on Everest. Media outlets reported his death. It was a tragedy, but not unusual. Everest claims lives every season. Except Lincoln Hall wasn't dead. The next morning, May 26th, an American climber named Dan Mazur and his team were ascending toward the summit. At around 7:30 a.m., at 28,200 feet, they saw something strange. A man, sitting on the side of the trail, jacket off, gloves off, no oxygen mask, staring into space. Mazur's first thought, another body. Another frozen corpse. Everest slopes are littered with them. He almost kept walking, and when he got closer, something made him stop. The man moved, turned his head, looked at Mazur and spoke. "I imagine you're surprised to see me here," the man said. Mazur was stunned. This man who should be dead, was alive, conscious, talking, but clearly in severe distress. His hands were black with frostbite, his skin was waxy, pale, and he was making no sense. He kept asking where he was, what year it was, why there were people around him. Mazur checked the man's clothing, found a name tag, Lincoln Hall. Mazur's team immediately radioed base camp. Lincoln Hall is alive. Repeat, Lincoln Hall is alive. At base camp, people thought it was a mistake, a hallucination. Lincoln Hall was dead. They'd confirmed it. The Sherpas had checked for a pulse. But Mazur insisted, "I'm looking at him right now. He's alive, and he needs help." Mazur faced a choice. He and his team were hours from the summit. They'd spent months preparing. Tens of thousands of dollars. This was their chance, but Lincoln Hall was dying. If they abandoned him, he'd be dead within hours. If they stayed to help, they'd miss the summit. And at this altitude, every minute they delayed increased the risk they die too. Dan Mazur made his decision instantly. "We're not leaving him." Mazur's team spent the next 4 hours keeping Lincoln alive. They gave him their oxygen, wrapped him in their jackets, forced hot liquids down his throat, and slowly, carefully helped him descend. They radioed for Sherpas to come up with more oxygen and supplies, and they stayed with Lincoln every step of the way. By the afternoon of May 26th, Lincoln Hall was back at Camp 4, alive, conscious. His frostbite was severe. He'd lose parts of his fingers and toes, but he'd survive. Dan Mazur and his team never reached the summit. They turned back to save Lincoln. And Mazur has said repeatedly that he has no regrets. "How could I?" Mazur said in interviews. "A man is alive because we stopped. That's the only thing that matters. The summit will always be there. Lincoln wouldn't have been." Lincoln Hall wrote a book about his experience, Dead Lucky. In it, he describes what it felt like to be left for dead, the confusion, the cold, the hallucinations, and the moment Dan Mazur appeared, offering him oxygen and hope. "I don't remember much," Hall wrote, "but I remember Dan's face, And I remember thinking, I'm going to live. Someone stopped. Someone chose me over the summit. The story of Lincoln Hall is the counterpoint to David Sharp. It proves that rescue is possible, that climbers can choose compassion over ambition, that the summit isn't always the most important thing. But here's the uncomfortable question. Why was Lincoln saved when David wasn't? The answers are complex. Timing. Lincoln was found early in the morning, when climbers had time and oxygen to help. David was found late, when climbers were already exhausted and running low on supplies. Team support. Lincoln was part of a professional expedition with Sherpas and resources. David was solo with minimal support. Altitude. Lincoln collapsed at 28,200 feet. David was at 27,190 feet. The difference is small but significant in terms of how much assistance a rescue team could provide. Luck. Dan Mazur is, by all accounts, an exceptionally moral person. He made a choice many climbers wouldn't make, and Lincoln happened to be found by him. But there's another darker explanation that no one wants to say out loud. Lincoln Hall was with a professional team. He had visibility, media attention, a family that could sue if he wasn't rescued. David Sharp was a solo climber. No one was watching. No one would hold climbers accountable for walking past him. Lincoln Hall himself addressed this in interviews. I was lucky. I was found by the right person at the right time. But I also had resources, support, people advocating for me. David Sharp didn't have that, and I think that mattered, and that's shameful. Lincoln Hall survived because someone chose to save him. David Sharp died because no one did. And the difference between life and death on Everest often comes down to luck, timing, and who happens to walk past when you're dying. In 1998, Frances Asentev became the first American woman to summit Mount Everest without supplemental oxygen. It was an extraordinary achievement. Only a handful of people in the world had done it. But on the descent, Frances collapsed at 27,200 feet. And what happened next is one of the most haunting stories in Everest history. Frances didn't die quickly. She died over the course of 2 days, slowly, visibly, while multiple teams of climbers passed her. And unlike David Sharp, who was barely conscious when found, Frances was fully aware, fully conscious, able to speak, able to beg for help. The first climbers to find her were members of an Uzbek expedition, ascending toward the summit on May 23, 1998. They spotted Frances lying on her back on a steep, rocky slope. Her jacket was torn, her hands were frostbitten, and she was moving, trying to sit up, failing. The Uzbek stopped, checked her condition, and realized she's dying, hypothermic, frostbitten, but alive, conscious. Frances looked at them and spoke. Please, don't leave me. The Uzbek team tried. They spent hours attempting to move her, tried to lift her, tried to get her to stand, but Frances's legs were frozen. She couldn't walk, couldn't even bend her knees. Every time they tried to move her, she screamed in pain. The Uzbeks radioed for help, asked if a helicopter could reach her. The answer, no, too high, too dangerous. They discussed other options. Could they drag her down? No. The terrain was too steep. Could they carry her? No. She was dead weight, and they were already oxygen-deprived and exhausted. After hours of trying, the Uzbek team made a decision: leave. They descended, promising to send help. But help never came, because at that altitude there is no help. No rescue team can reach you. No helicopter can fly that high. You're on your own. The next day, May 24th, 2 more climbers found Frances, Ian Woodall and Kathy O'Dowd, members of a South African expedition. They were on their way to the summit when they saw her, still alive, still lying on the slope. But her condition had deteriorated dramatically. Woodall later described what he saw. She was still breathing, but her eyes were unfocused. She was making sounds, low, guttural moans. She couldn't form words anymore. But she was aware. She knew we were there. Woodall and O'Dowd stopped, assessed the situation, and realized she's beyond saving. Even if they used all their oxygen, even if they abandoned their summit attempt, even if they risked their own lives, the chances of getting Francis down were essentially zero. But they couldn't just walk away. So they stayed for an hour. Woodall took off his jacket and draped it over Francis, even though he knew it wouldn't save her. He held her hand, talked to her, told her she wasn't alone. And then he radioed base camp. The response was clear. There's nothing you can do. If you stay, you'll die too. Descend. Woodall and O'Dowd made the decision to leave. As they walked away, Francis's eyes tracked them, watching, aware. Woodall later said, "That image, her eyes following us as we left, haunts me. I see it when I close my eyes. I'll see it for the rest of my life." Francis Asentev died sometime on the night of May 24th. Alone. Fully conscious of what was happening. Knowing she'd been abandoned, knowing she was going to freeze to death, her body remained visible for 9 years. Climbers passing the northeast ridge would see her, sprawled on the rocks, blonde hair blowing in the wind, face frozen in an expression that wasn't peaceful or anguished, but just empty. They called her Sleeping Beauty, because from a distance she looked like she was resting. But up close, the reality was horrific, and climbers reported nightmares, guilt, trauma. Because Francis wasn't just a body. She was a woman who'd begged for help, who'd looked climbers in the eyes and said, "Please don't leave me." And they'd left her anyway. In 2007, 9 years after Francis died, Ian Woodall returned to Everest. He couldn't live with the guilt anymore. He'd spent nearly a decade haunted by the decision to walk away from a dying woman. So he organized a team, climbed back to 27,200 feet, and moved Francis's body. It took hours. Her frozen corpse weighed over 200 pounds, but Woodall's team shifted her off the main route, wrapped her in an American flag, said prayers, and pushed her body off a steep ledge into a crevasse where she'd be hidden from view. Woodall later explained, "I didn't do it for her. She's gone. I did it for us, for the climbers who had to keep walking past her, and for myself, because I needed to do something. I couldn't change the decision I made in 1998, but I could give her some dignity in death. But the question remains, should Woodall have left her in 1998? Ethicists have debated this for decades. Some argue that Woodall made the only rational decision. Francis was beyond saving. Staying with her would have killed him too, 2 deaths instead of 1. Others argue that Woodall should have stayed, that witnessing someone's death, even if you can't prevent it, is a moral obligation, that Francis deserved to not die alone. That comfort in the final moments is worth something, even if it costs you the summit. Woodall himself has said, "I don't know if I made the right choice. I know I made the survivable choice. But I'll never know if staying with her, even if it meant missing the summit, even if it meant risking my life, would have been the right thing to do. And I'll carry that uncertainty forever." Francis Asentev begged climbers not to leave her. They left anyway. Was that murder? Or was it survival? The answer depends on what you believe humans owe each other in the death zone, and there is no consensus. To understand why climbers walk past the dying, you need to understand what the death zone does to the human brain. Because above 26,000 feet on Mount Everest, you are not operating as a fully functional human being. You are, quite literally, dying, and your brain knows it. The physiology. At sea level, the air contains approximately 21%
Your lungs
extract
oxygen.
that oxygen, your blood transports it, and your cells use it to produce energy. This process keeps you alive. At 26,000 feet, the start of the death zone, the air still contains 21% oxygen, but the atmospheric pressure is so low that your lungs can't extract enough of it. The effective oxygen level, what your body actually receives, is equivalent to breathing 6 to 7% oxygen at sea level. This is insufficient to sustain human life. Your body begins to die. Immediately, cells consume themselves. Organs shut down. Your brain, which requires 20% of your body's oxygen supply, begins to fail. Hypoxia, oxygen deprivation, causes confusion, disorientation, slowed reactions, poor judgment, memory loss, hallucinations, loss of coordination, irrational behavior, then unconsciousness and death. Exhaustion makes every step feel like 3. Climbing a few feet feels like a marathon as the body burns temperatures near 40 degrees Celsius, wind chills near 100 degrees Celsius, frostbite in minutes. In this oxygen-starved, exhausted, freezing state, moral reasoning collapses. You're operating on instinct, survival mode, and in survival mode, empathy is a luxury you can't afford. The psychology. Dr. A. Kenneth Kamler, a physician who has treated climbers on Everest, explains empathy is a higher-order brain function. It requires the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for complex decision-making and moral reasoning, to be functioning properly. In the death zone, that part of your brain is shutting down. You're literally losing the ability to care about others. This is not an excuse. It's a biological reality. Climbers in the death zone report experiencing emotional numbness. I saw someone sitting in the snow. I knew I should feel something, but I felt nothing. No fear, no sadness, just nothing. Tunnel vision. All I could think about was putting one foot in front of the other. Everything else, the bodies, the people, the danger, it all faded into background noise. Rationalization. I told myself they were already dead, that there was nothing I could do, and I believed it, because I had to believe it. Otherwise, I couldn't keep climbing. Dissociation. It didn't feel real. It felt like I was watching myself in a movie, walking past bodies, stepping over people, and it didn't register as wrong. This is why climbers can walk past the dying without collapsing under guilt, because in the moment, their brains aren't processing it as a moral failure. They're processing it as survival. The ethical dilemma. But here's the uncomfortable question. If climbers' brains aren't functioning properly in the death zone, should they be held morally responsible for their actions? Philosophers have debated this for decades. Argument 1. Diminished capacity. Climbers in the death zone are cognitively impaired. They're not capable of making rational moral decisions. Blaming them for walking past the dying is like blaming someone with dementia for forgetting your name. They're not in control. Argument 2. Voluntary impairment. Climbers chose to enter the death zone. They knew the risks. They knew their brains would stop functioning properly. Choosing to put yourself in a situation where you can't make moral decisions is itself a moral failure. Argument 3. The duty of preparation. If climbers know the death zone impairs judgment, they should prepare for it. Pre-commit to ethical principles. Decide before the climb. If I encounter someone dying, I will help, even if it costs me the summit. Make the moral decision before your brain stops working. But very few climbers do this, because the reality is, when you're in the death zone, when you're oxygen deprived and exhausted, when you see a dying person and the summit is right there, logic and ethics and pre-commitments all disappear. You're left with a simple, primal choice. Save yourself or die trying to save someone else, and most people choose survival. The uncomfortable truth. The death zone reveals something fundamental about human nature, something we don't like to admit. When our own survival is at stake, most of us abandon our moral principles. We tell ourselves we'd be heroes, that we'd sacrifice for strangers, that we'd never walk past someone begging for help. But Everest proves otherwise. Because on that mountain, in the death zone, surrounded by the dying, most climbers make the same choice. Keep climbing. And they live with that choice for the rest of their lives. Some are haunted by it. Others rationalize it. But all of them know they walked past someone who needed help, and that person died. Is that murder? No. Is it morally acceptable? That depends on what you believe humans owe each other when survival is uncertain. The mountain's verdict. Everest doesn't care about ethics, doesn't care about empathy, doesn't care about guilt or trauma or moral dilemmas. The mountain just exists, indifferent, cold, and it kills indiscriminately. But the climbers who survive, they carry the weight, because the death zone may impair your brain in the moment, but memory works just fine. And years later, sitting at home, safe and warm, with your brain fully oxygenated and functioning, you remember. You remember the face of the person you walked past. You remember their voice, their eyes, and you ask yourself, could I have saved them? Should I have tried? What kind of person does it make me that I didn't? And there are no good answers, just uncomfortable silence, and the knowledge that you chose the summit over a stranger's life. And you have to live with that choice, forever. On May 22, 2019, a photo went viral. It showed a long line of climbers, over 200 people, queuing single file on a narrow section of Mount Everest's southeast ridge, just below the summit. The line stretched hundreds of meters, climbers in bright-colored suits waiting their turn to climb a fixed rope, like customers at a theme park ride. Except this wasn't a theme park. This was the death zone, and waiting in line at 28,000 plus feet doesn't just waste time. It kills. That day, May 22, 2019, 4 people died on Everest, and in the week surrounding that day, 11 people died, most from exhaustion, hypothermia, running out of oxygen while waiting in the traffic jam. This wasn't a natural disaster. This wasn't an avalanche or a sudden storm. This was a man-made catastrophe caused by overcrowding, poor planning, and a climbing industry that prioritizes profit over safety. The traffic jam. The bottleneck occurred at the Hillary Step, a nearly vertical 40-foot rock face just below the summit. Only one person can climb it at a time. In a normal season, with reasonable numbers of climbers, this creates a short delay. Maybe 10-15 minutes, but 2019 wasn't a normal season. Nepal had issued 381 climbing permits, a record. Combined with guides and Sherpas, that meant over 800 people were trying to summit during the narrow weather window in mid-May. The result, a traffic jam, hundreds of climbers waiting in a single-file line, exposed to extreme cold and wind, burning through their limited oxygen supplies, unable to move forward or retreat safely. Climbers reported waiting 2 to 4 hours in the queue. At that altitude, standing still for hours is deadly. Your body temperature drops, your oxygen runs out, and if you sit down to rest, you might never stand up again. The deaths. Ravi Thakar, India, 28 years old, died waiting in the queue near the summit. He ran out of oxygen, collapsed, and froze to death while hundreds of people stood around him, unable to help because they were also running out of oxygen. Kalpana Das, India, 52 years old, summited successfully but collapsed on the descent, exhausted from hours of waiting in the traffic jam. She died at 27,500 feet. Donald Lynn Cash, USA, 55 years old, died after summiting, collapsing from exhaustion during the descent. Anjali Kulkarni, India, 55 years old, collapsed and died near the summit after running out of oxygen in the queue. Climbers reported stepping over people who collapsed in the line. Some were dead, some were dying. Some were just exhausted, sitting in the snow, hoping to recover enough strength to continue. One climber, Nirmal Purja, a Nepali mountaineer and former Gurkha soldier, posted a photo of the traffic jam with the caption, "This is what Everest has become, a queue to die." Why didn't people turn back? This is the critical question. When climbers saw the traffic jam, when they realized they'd be waiting hours in the death zone, why didn't they turn back? The answers are depressingly predictable. Sunk cost fallacy. I've spent $100,000, trained for a year. I'm not turning back now. Social pressure. Everyone else is continuing. If I turn back, I'll look weak. Summit fever. The summit is right there. Just a few more hours. I can make it. Overconfidence. I'll be fine. I'm strong, and I have enough oxygen. All of this, the commercialization of Everest has created a culture where the summit is guaranteed, or at least expected. Clients pay 50,000, 100,000 pluses for guided expeditions. They expect to reach the top, and guides feel pressure to deliver. Even when conditions are dangerous, even when the smart decision is to turn back. The blame. Who's responsible for the 2019 deaths? The climbers. They chose to continue despite obvious danger. The guides. They allowed clients to proceed despite the traffic jam. The Nepali government. They issued too many permits, creating overcrowding. The climbing industry. They marketed Everest as achievable for anyone with money, attracting inexperienced climbers. The truth, everyone shares blame, but no one will be held accountable. Because the Nepali government depends on climbing permit revenue, $11 million USD in 2019. The climbing industry depends on clients, and climbers depend on the belief that the summit is worth any risk. The aftermath. After 2019, there were calls for Nepal to limit permits, to enforce stricter experience requirements, to close the mountain during overcrowded seasons. Some changes were implemented. Nepal now requires proof of climbing experience for Everest permits, but the core problem remains. Everest is a business, and businesses prioritize profit. In 2023, Nepal issued 478 permits, 97 more than the deadly 2019 season. The traffic jams returned, and so did the deaths, the uncomfortable reality. The 2019 traffic jam revealed something deeply uncomfortable. Climbers will literally stand in line, watching people die in front of them, and still wait their turn to summit, because the summit matters more than survival, more than safety, more than the lives of strangers. And this isn't unique to Everest. It's human nature. We prioritize our goals over collective well-being. We ignore warning signs, we rationalize risk, and we convince ourselves it won't happen to me. Until it does. One climber's testimony. Ilya Saikali, a filmmaker who was on Everest during the 2019 traffic jam, described the scene. I saw people collapsing, saw people sitting in the snow, giving up, and climbers just stepped around them like they were obstacles, not people. And I thought, this is what we've become. This is what Everest has done to us. Saikali turned back, didn't summit, and later said, I'm proud of that decision because I chose life over glory, and too few people are willing to make that choice. The 2019 traffic jam proved that overcrowding kills, but it also proved that knowledge isn't enough, because despite the deaths, despite the viral photo, despite the global outrage, people are still climbing, still queuing, still dying, because the summit calls, and for many that call is louder than the screams of the dying. Philosophers, ethicists, and climbers have debated for decades. When is it morally acceptable to leave someone dying on Everest? There's no consensus, but the debate reveals deep divisions in how we think about moral obligation, personal responsibility, and the value of human life. Position 1. You have no obligation to risk your life for a stranger. This is the libertarian individualist position. It argues moral duty has limits. You're not obligated to die saving someone else. Self-preservation is rational. Choosing survival over heroism is not immoral. Risk was voluntary. Climbers choose to be on Everest. They accept the risks, including the risk of dying alone. Philosopher Robert Nozick argued that moral obligations don't require self-sacrifice to the point of death. You can't be expected to die for a stranger, Nozick wrote. That's supererogatory, above and beyond moral duty. Applied to Everest. If helping someone will likely kill you, you're not morally obligated to help. Climbers who hold this view say things like, I have a family. If I die trying to save a stranger, my children lose a parent. That's not
selfish.
heroic. Everyone on Everest knows the risks. If you get into trouble, You can't expect others to sacrifice themselves for you. Position 2. You have a duty to help, if you reasonably can. This is the utilitarian, humanitarian position. It argues human life has value. Letting someone die when you could help is morally wrong. Reasonable effort is required. You don't have to die trying, but you should do what you reasonably can. If you have oxygen to spare, if you can give someone water, if you can radio for help, you should. Philosopher Peter Singer argues that if you can prevent something bad from happening without sacrificing something of comparable moral importance, you're obligated to act. Applied to Everest, if you can help without serious risk to yourself, you must help. Climbers who hold this view say things like, I don't have to die for them, but I can share oxygen. I can radio for help. I can stay with them so they don't die alone. Walking past someone without even trying to help makes you complicit in their death. Position 3. The duty to help depends on context. This is the contextual, pragmatic position. It argues there's no universal rule. Every situation is unique. Factors matter. The victim's condition, your own condition, available resources, likelihood of success. Sometimes good helping is required. Sometimes it's futile. Ethicist Bernard Williams argued that moral decisions can't be reduced to simple rules. Ethics requires wisdom, Williams wrote, not algorithms. Applied to Everest. You evaluate each situation and make the best decision you can with the information available. Climbers who hold this view say things like, if someone's barely conscious at 28,000 feet, there's nothing I can do. But if someone's alert at 26,000 feet and just needs help walking, I should help. I assess the situation. If rescue seems possible, I try. If it seems futile, I don't. The problem: none of these positions feels satisfying, because the reality is, position 1 feels cold. I'm not obligated to help is technically defensible but morally uncomfortable. Position 2 feels naive. Always help sounds noble, but ignores the brutal reality that helping often means dying. Position 3 feels evasive. It depends, is honest, but provides no clear guidance. And climbers who've actually faced this choice report feeling torn between all three positions simultaneously. Real testimonies. Mark Inglis, past David Sharp. I reported his position. I radioed for help. I did what I reasonably could, but people wanted me to stay, to sacrifice my summit, to risk my life, and I didn't. Does that make me a bad person? But I made the choice I could live with. Dan Mazur, saved Lincoln Hall. I don't think I'm a hero. I just couldn't walk past someone who might survive. But I also had a team. Resources. If I'd been solo, if I'd been low on oxygen, I don't know what I would have done, and I'm grateful I never had to find out. Ian Woodall left Francis Asentev. I stayed with her for an hour. I held her hand. I told her she wasn't alone, and then I left her to die. Does the hour I spent with her matter? Or does leaving her erase any good I did? I'll never know. The cultural divide. Western climbers tend toward position 2, duty to help. They believe individualism doesn't absolve moral responsibility. Sherpa climbers tend toward position 3, contextual. They've seen more death, understand the mountain's brutality, and judge each situation pragmatically. But there's also an uncomfortable economic reality. Sherpas are often expected to risk their lives for Western clients. But Western clients are not expected to risk their lives for Sherpas. In 2014, after an avalanche killed 16 Sherpas, the Sherpa community went on strike. They demanded better pay, better insurance, and recognition that their lives mattered as much as clients' lives. The strike forced confrontation. Does the climbing industry value Sherpa lives equally? The answer, in practice, is no. The verdict: there is no universal answer to when is it okay to leave someone dying, because every situation is different. Every person's capacity to help varies. Every climber's risk tolerance differs. But what is clear? walking past the dying without even attempting to help, without radioing for assistance, without offering oxygen, without staying even briefly, is morally indefensible. You don't have to die for strangers, but you do have to acknowledge their humanity. And on Everest, too many climbers fail even that basic test, because in the death zone, empathy dies first. And once it's gone, we're all just animals fighting for survival, and animals don't save each other. They just keep climbing. Not everyone keeps climbing. Some climbers, faced with impossible conditions, dying teammates, or moral conflicts, make the hardest decision of all: turn back. And these climbers are rarely celebrated. They don't get documentaries. They don't make headlines, because turning back isn't dramatic. It's not heroic. It's just sensible. And society doesn't reward sensible. We reward glory. But the climbers who turn back have something the summiteers often lack: peace. Ed Viesturs, the man who turned back more than he summited. Ed Viesturs is one of the most accomplished high-altitude climbers in history. He summited all 14 peaks above 8,000 meters without supplemental oxygen. But he's turned back from summits more times than he's reached them. His motto, getting to the top is optional. Getting down is mandatory. Viesturs has turned back when weather looked bad, even if the forecast said it would clear. He felt fatigued, even if he was close to the summit. His instinct said something was wrong, even if he couldn't explain why. In 1987, Viesturs was 300 meters from the summit of Everest. He'd been climbing for hours. The summit was right there, but clouds were rolling in, and he felt off. His body was telling him, stop. He turned back, descended, and watched from base camp as the storm he'd sensed rolled in and killed 2 climbers who'd continued. Viesturs later said, "Turning back saved my life, and I didn't regret it for a second, because I climbed Everest years later. But if I'd died in 1987, I'd never have climbed anything else." Bonita Norris, 100 meters from the summit. In 2012, British climber Bonita Norris was attempting to summit Everest. She'd trained for years, and she was so close, just 100 meters from the top, but she was moving too slowly. Her oxygen was running low, and her guide told her, "We need to turn back now." Norris later described the decision. "It was the hardest thing I've ever done. Turning back when the summit is right there feels like failure, like quitting, like everything you've done was for nothing. But I knew, if I kept going, I'd probably die, and I didn't want to die. So I turned back." She summited Everest successfully the following year, and she says the summit felt sweeter because she'd made the right decision the year before. "Turning back taught me that the summit isn't the goal," Norris said. "Surviving is the goal, and if you don't survive, the summit doesn't matter." Kami Rita Sherpa, the man with 30 summits who still turns back. Kami Rita Sherpa holds the record for most Everest summits, 30. He's climbed the mountain more than anyone in history, and yet he's also turned back multiple times. In 2019, during the deadly traffic jam season, Kami turned back from a summit attempt because conditions were too dangerous. Critics mocked him. "You've summited 27 times. Why turn back now?" His response, "Because I want to summit 28 times, and 29, and 30. I can't do that if I'm dead." Kami represents a fundamental truth about Everest. The climbers who survive longest are the ones who know when to quit. The psychology of turning back. Turning back requires overcoming multiple psychological barriers. Sunk cost fallacy. I've spent so much time, money, effort, I can't quit now. Social pressure. What will people think if I don't summit? Summit fever. The summit is right there. Just a little farther. Ego. I'm strong enough, I can make it. Dr. Charles Houston, a pioneering high-altitude researcher, studied climbers who turned back versus climbers who pushed forward. He found Climbers who turn back report higher life satisfaction. Post-climb climbers who push forward despite warning signs report higher rates of PTSD, guilt, and regret. Climbers who witness deaths while summiting often wish they'd turned back. In other words, the summit feels good for a day. The decision to turn back feels good for a lifetime. The celebration gap. But society doesn't celebrate climbers who turn back. We celebrate summiteers. We make documentaries about the people who reach the top, not the people who had the wisdom to retreat. Ed Viesturs has addressed this. People ask me about my summits. No one asks about the times I turned back, but turning back saved my life. And that's the real achievement, staying alive. What turning back teaches us. The climbers who turn back teach us something essential. Ambition is not the same as wisdom. Ambition says, keep going, achieve the goal, ignore the risks. Wisdom says the goal isn't worth dying for, survival is victory, living to try again is success, and Everest rewards wisdom because the mountain doesn't care about your ambition. It only cares whether you respect its power. And the climbers who respect it, who turn back when conditions are bad, who prioritize survival over glory, are the ones who live to climb another day. The climbers who walk past the dying, they're often driven by ambition. The climbers who turn back, they're guided by wisdom. And in the long run, wisdom beats ambition. Every time, Mount Everest doesn't care why climbers walk past the dying, doesn't care about ethics or morality or moral dilemmas. The mountain is indifferent. It kills, takes, keeps, and moves on. But we, humans, care. We judge. We debate. We ask, how could anyone walk past someone begging for help? And the answer is uncomfortable, because we're human. And humans, when pushed to their limits, prioritize survival over compassion. This isn't unique to Everest. History is filled with examples. Lifeboats leaving drowning passengers behind after the Titanic sank, concentration camp survivors stealing food from dying inmates, disaster situations where people trample others to escape. In extreme conditions, moral behavior breaks down. And Everest is an extreme condition. The death zone strips away the veneer of civilization. And what's left is raw, primal survival instinct. The uncomfortable truth. The reason we're so fascinated by stories of climbers walking past the dying is because we know, deep down, that we'd probably make the same choice. We tell ourselves we'd be heroes. But Everest proves otherwise. David Sharp was found by over 40 climbers. Only a handful stopped, most kept walking. And those climbers aren't monsters. They're normal people who, in an impossible situation, chose survival. Lincoln Hall was found by Dan Mazur, who chose compassion, and Hall survived. But Mazur himself admits, if I'd been solo, if I'd been running low on oxygen, I don't know what I would have done. Francis Asentev begged climbers not to leave her. They left anyway. And those climbers live with guilt, but they're still alive. And Francis isn't. The mountain's lesson. Everest teaches us that humans are not inherently good or evil. We're context-dependent. In safe conditions, with resources and support, we're capable of extraordinary compassion. But in extreme conditions, when survival is uncertain, we revert to self-preservation. This doesn't excuse walking past the dying, but it explains it. And understanding is the first step toward change. The change. Since David Sharp's death in 2006, there's been slow progress. More climbers carry extra oxygen for emergencies. Radio communication has improved. Some expeditions pre-commit to turning back if they encounter dying climbers. Sherpa organizations advocate for better safety protocols, but the fundamental problem remains. Everest is overcrowded, commercialized, and dangerous. And as long as people pay $100,000 to summit, the industry will keep sending them up. The final question. So why do climbers walk past the dying on Everest? Because the summit matters more. Not because climbers are evil, not because they lack empathy, but because humans, when given a choice between achieving their dreams and saving strangers, often choose their dreams. And Everest, cold, indifferent, eternal, keeps testing that choice. Every season, every summit attempt, every dying person sitting in the snow, watching climbers walk past. The mountain doesn't judge. It just takes, and it will keep taking until we learn the lesson it's been teaching for decades. The summit is not worth a human life. Not yours, not theirs, not anyone's. But we keep climbing anyway, because ambition is stronger than wisdom, because ego is louder than empathy, because we believe, it won't be me, I'll make it, I'm different, until we're not, until we're the ones sitting in the snow, watching climbers walk past, begging them not to leave, and they walk past anyway, because that's what humans do in the death zone, where empathy goes to die and the mountain watches, silent, indifferent, waiting for the next person to make the same mistake, the same choice, the same walk past the dying on their way to glory.